Here item sites food interview. Cell remigens progetfus. Sestemming credit start as dead. The dog new battery. Complain. Ignant off ponent ambiguity bed. Stead transistation and speak. In fey. Sohn usters. K. Yoon. A star renia. Brand atted. A loot reform change ides 400 ADV. Polit rigort potfo. Looking see. Enough. Bencol 3-0-eyed. Dead. Steady end. The dog get heard. The system's time. One new is today and known states might and benjulust. And get id. Neat. Oi dead. Sked potis. And test. And AF. Get children to under. Many ends. Imparison. And cold backing. And connection called shores. Their elfrazitition proposes. Transstation moves to drong, dord. And feshel beast to dog. And job. Connection, it closes a call. Prand intulate, in new country, and affiand am. Mild days to live, and rest is time. Usternt, leaves, where? The dog move in stew standards to these, and that was my neist. P-end, scanned or, quotations, and D. With tourney. Condones sent enspake and standing group into result, and sun catches. Kangs. Also, shores, four mensers, wellisers. On D day. D. End you, preser join. Isi join order and see, the star. It had been 17 months since the raid. 17 months since the government declared Officer Mason Rourke missing and presumed dead. Elena had finally stopped hoping. Until that night. A call came in from St. Helena, unidentified John Doe, burn injuries. Coma, possible K9 connection. She brought Echo. Not for comfort, but for confirmation. What happened next would change the course of her life and expose a plot that went deeper than a cartel ambush. Because when Echo entered the room, he didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the bandaged man on the ventilator, rested his chin on the mattress, and let out a sound Elena hadn't heard since their last morning as a family. Not a growl, not a bark, pressed lightly over her child. Beneath the pressure, she felt the faint flutter of a kick, a reminder that life still stirred, even when death tried to blanket everything. She looked at Echo. He wasn't just distressed. He was communicating. How many nights had she seen that dog watch over Mason like a second shadow? How many times had she awoken at 3 a.m. to Echo stationed beside their bed, alert, unmoving, ears twitching at every creak in the floorboards? Echo didn't act without reason. He never had. And now, he was trying to tell her something. Something urgent. Let him do what he needs, she said quietly. Please. The crowd murmured. Several officers exchanged glances. Some looked outraged, others unsure, but no one approached the casket again. Echo kept digging, but slower now. His chest heaved with effort, and the blood from his paws soaked deeper into the white of the flag. He began to whine, soft and desperate, a noise that sounded more like mourning than madness. Elena moved closer. Her legs were unsteady. A sharp breeze nearly toppled her before Chief Ortega gently steadied her arm. She nodded once, grateful, but not pausing. She stepped forward until she stood beside Echo. The dog paused. just for a second. His amber eyes, once full of intensity, now shimmered with something deeper, pleading. He let out a single sound, low, elongated, almost like a sob. Elena knelt. "Echo," she whispered, placing one hand gently on his back. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. But he trembled, the kind of full-body tremor that animals only allow themselves when they are completely exposed. It was grief, but it wasn't goodbye. It was something else. The officers had gathered in a loose circle around them. None spoke. The silence was almost sacred, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the tiny, repeated thud of Echo's nails against wood. Elena pressed her other hand on the smooth surface of the casket, and that's when she felt it. A vibration, subtle, repetitive, like something inside her memory had been stirred. 3 soft scrapes. Pause. 3 harder ones. Pause. 3 soft again. 3 short. 3 long. 3 short. S-O-S. Her pulse surged. She looked at Echo, who had stopped clawing. Now he was pacing. "Wouldn't leave Echo behind," she said. "And Echo wouldn't act like this unless something was terribly wrong." She rose, her eyes locked with Ortega's. "Open the coffin." He blinked. "Elena, open it. Now." The wind howled suddenly, rattling the branches above. The trumpet at the far end of the field clattered to the grass, forgotten. All eyes turned toward the flag-draped casket. Echo sat at its head, bloodied paws planted firm, tail unmoving. A sentinel made of muscle, pain, and purpose. The kind of silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken, waiting to break. At first, it seemed like the dog was simply circling out of grief. One tight turn around the head of the casket, then a second, slower and more deliberate. But by the third, even the most hardened officers started shifting uneasily. This wasn't erratic panic. It was patterned, intentional, like choreography remembered from a darker time. Elena stood stone still beside the polished wood, her black dress fluttering gently in the breeze that came sweeping over the hills. The fabric felt too heavy on her shoulders, the world too bright. The silence around her had become unnatural, taut and listening. Echo was circling counterclockwise, always that direction, always the same measured steps. Blood from his torn paws trailed behind him, like punctuation in a forgotten language. And with each revolution, the dog let out a sound, not quite a bark, not quite a whimper. Elena's eyes narrowed. Her hand instinctively dropped to her stomach, where the baby had just stirred, as if feeling the tremor in the air that only mothers and animals could sense. Then it clicked. "S-O-S," she whispered. A gasp escaped her lips before she could hold it back. She staggered a step, her knees nearly buckling, but she caught herself against the casket's edge. "What did you say?" asked Chief Ortega from behind her. But she didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched as Echo stopped pacing for the briefest of moments, looked up at her with those amber eyes, and then resumed the pattern. 1 full circle, 3 sharp whines, 3 low, mournful howls, 3 quick yips, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Elena turned toward Ortega, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. "He's not saying goodbye," she said. "He's sending a distress signal." There was silence again, but this time it was charged. No longer the silence of respect, but of disbelief, brushing up against the edge of something terrifying. "That's impossible," murmured one of the honor guards, glancing at the canine handler beside him. "He's just grieving." But Echo didn't grieve like other dogs. Remembered the day Mason first brought him home. Echo hadn't made a sound. Not when Lila dropped her plastic cup. Not when the neighbor's lawnmower screamed to life. But the moment Mason opened the mailbox, Echo had growled low, a sound that didn't match the moment. 2 hours later, they learned the mailman had unknowingly brought a letter laced with a contact neurotoxin. It had seeped from an evidence envelope. Echo knew. He always knew. Elena opened her eyes. "I need you to listen to me." Chief Ortega stepped forward. His jaw was set, his voice grave. "Elena, I know this is overwhelming. This is a sacred moment, a military burial. I can't authorize opening that casket without a formal—" "I don't need authorization," she said, her voice suddenly steel. "I'm not asking as his wife. I'm telling you, as a medical professional, that something is wrong." She pointed to Echo. "Look at him. Look at his pattern, his body language. He's not mourning. He's signaling. That casket, it doesn't belong to Mason." A ripple moved through the gathered crowd, like wind in tall grass. Echo stopped again. This time, he didn't continue his circle. He sat down, precisely at the head of the coffin, and placed his left paw on the folded flag, now stained dark with his own blood. Then, slowly, deliberately, he laid his head across it, his eyes never leaving Elena's. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. "Mommy, is Daddy calling?" The little girl stood there, dress wrinkled from where she'd been clutching it, cheeks streaked with silent tears. Her voice trembled with hope so fragile it could have shattered under the weight of a wrong word. Elena crouched, pulling her daughter close. "I don't know, baby, but Echo hears something, and we have to trust him." The trumpet player lowered his instrument. The priest stepped back from the podium. Even the cemetery groundskeepers paused, their shovels limp in their hands. The ceremony had stopped not from disruption, but from transformation. This was no longer a funeral. It was an alarm bell, and Echo was the one sounding it. "Sir," said Eva Santos, stepping forward, her detective's badge glinting against her jacket. She had known Mason for years, partnered with him before his canine days. Her voice was low, careful. "If there's even a chance something's wrong, we need to act now. You know what that dog is trained to do." Chief Ortega looked between them all, Elena, Lila, Santos, and Echo, then down at the coffin, the crimson prints like fingerprints on history. He let out a breath like the weight of his whole. Elena held Lila against her, feeling her daughter's small heartbeat thrum against her chest. She realized hers matched it, beat for beat. And as the lid slowly creaked open, wood lifting, hinges groaning in the autumn air, a whisper passed over the gathered mourners. It wasn't from wind, it was from knowing. Something was wrong, the kind of wrong that changed everything. Echo stood, rigid, silent, watching and waiting. The hinges groaned as the casket lid opened, a sound not meant to be heard at funerals. It didn't belong here, amidst the flags and pressed uniforms, the floral wreaths and folded prayers. It sliced through the still air with the weight of a truth long buried. Elena didn't breathe. Neither did anyone else. As the lid lifted fully and the pale silk lining inside was revealed, the first thing she noticed was the body's posture, stiff, formal, dressed in a freshly pressed uniform just like Mason's. Hands folded over the badge, medals pinned to the chest. But something was off, something that struck her not like a scream, but like a slow, cold realization creeping through the marrow. She stared at the body's hands, too slender, then the shoulders, too narrow, and then the jaw, unfamiliar. The chin bore a faint, crescent-shaped scar, not from any field wound Mason had endured, but from something else, something older, childhood perhaps. "No," Elena murmured, shaking her head. Her body turned cold as her mind raced. She'd memorized every inch of her husband's frame, not just as a nurse, but as a woman in love. Every scar, every line, every freckle and fracture. This wasn't Mason. That was when Echo stood, slowly, deliberately. He stepped forward, silent now, the blood from his raw paws leaving delicate prints on the flagged platform like ghost writing, a testimony writ in crimson. Then Elena spoke. 3 words, not shouted, not screamed, but said with such clarity and conviction that they tore the fabric of the gathering clean down the middle. "That's not him." A beat of silence. Then, "What?" Chief Ortega asked, stepping closer. His face paled beneath the brim of his cap. "Elena, are you sure?" She turned to face him. Her eyes were no longer wet, they were steel. "That's not Mason. That is not my husband." More murmurs, unsettled movement rippled through the crowd. A woman gasped behind them. Someone from the back rose. The priest lowered his Bible. The bugler dropped his trumpet. A young officer stepped forward and looked into the casket. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "that's Officer Kyle Jensen." Elena swayed slightly. Jensen. He was part of Mason's entry team during the warehouse raid. Like a monument, unmoving, eyes fixed not on the body but beyond it, toward something only he could see. His chest rose and fell in quiet rhythm, and for the first time since the chaos began, there was peace in his eyes. Not relief, but confirmation. He had been right. Echo had never grieved. He had known. "He was trying to tell us," Elena said aloud. "All this time, he was trying to say this wasn't Mason." "Someone made a mistake," said a voice in the crowd. "No," Elena replied instantly. "This isn't a mix-up." She turned back to Ortega. "If Kyle is here, then where's Mason?" The question landed like a thunderclap. Ortega stiffened. "We were told," he paused, pulled a small leather notebook from his coat pocket. "Initial report said Jensen died at the scene. Mason was transported in critical condition, but was later confirmed deceased at St. Helena Hospital." "And who confirmed that?" Helena asked, her voice brittle. "Who signed off on Mason's death?" The chief looked at his notes again, flipping back pages as the color drained from his face. "No name," he said, "just preliminary field report, identification by badge and uniform." Helena clenched her fists. Mason's badge was always clipped to his vest, not his shirt. In a firefight, that would have been left behind. Her voice cracked, but only at the edges. "And if his face was injured," she added quietly, "then how could they have known?" Chief Ortega turned to the funeral director, who looked like he wanted to sink into the soil beneath his feet. "Get me St. Helena," Ortega ordered. "Right now. Dispatch, ER, morgue. I want confirmation of all body IDs from the warehouse raid. Get me the logs, the name of every patient admitted, every officer declared deceased. I want them rechecked." "Sir," one of the officers said, pulling out his phone, "I'm patching into dispatch now." Helena stepped away from the casket and knelt beside Echo. He was still sitting tall, but the fatigue in his frame was undeniable. His breathing was shallow. His chest heaved slightly with every exhale. She gently touched his flank. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew the whole time." Echo looked at her, ears barely twitching, tail unmoving, but eyes full of something ancient, something forged in the fire of service and survival. "Thank you," she said, and it wasn't enough, but she said it anyway. A phone buzzed. "Chief," one of the officers said, face pale as he handed over the device. "Hospital records coming in. There's a John Doe in ICU, critical, brought in from the warehouse, no confirmed ID, severe facial trauma, intubated, in a coma." Elena stood, her hand tightening on resolve. "Mobilize a detail. Elena, you're coming with us. I'll call Detective Santos. We're getting answers." As the crowd began to disperse, stunned and reeling, Echo remained beside the casket, not to mourn, but to mark the spot where the truth had been buried under mistake, or perhaps under something far worse. His job was not done, not yet. The hospital looked different at night. St. Elena Medical Center, normally buzzing with fluorescent routine and the shuffle of white coats, now seemed shrouded in dim corridors and cold silence, the kind of quiet that clings to grief and uncertainty, like fog clings to glass. Elena Reed stepped into the intensive care unit with her daughter's hand in hers and Echo limping silently at her side. A police escort had guided them through back entrances, bypassing waiting rooms and curious eyes. But it was still too bright, too sterile, too loud in the wrong places. She'd worked in hospitals for years, trauma wards, emergency floors. She'd heard heart monitors scream and held the hands of the dying. But nothing had ever felt like this, like every light overhead was watching, waiting, judging her for daring to hope. Lila clutched her mother's hand tightly, her eyes wide beneath the hoodie she refused to take off. She hadn't said a word since leaving the funeral. Elena didn't press. Some grief arrives quiet. The nurse at the desk, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes, behind fogged glasses, gave a soft nod when she saw them. "You're the family of room 311? Elena's voice was low. "Yes, I'm his wife, Elena Reed." The nurse hesitated. "No name on the intake. The trauma team admitted him 3 nights ago. Multiple gunshot wounds, facial fractures, chest trauma. No ID, no badge, no next of kin until now." "Is he still in an induced coma?" the nurse replied. "Stabilized but critical. We've had security posted since your call." She looked down at Echo, noticing the heavy limp and blood-stained wrap around his paw. "He's hurt." Elena offered a weak smile. "He wouldn't stay behind." The nurse didn't argue. They moved as a unit down the hall, the soft whir of the ventilators growing louder with every step. Elena felt her heart pressing up into her throat. With each door they passed, her hands tightened, one around Lila's, one around the small ID badge clipped to her coat. And then they were there. Room 311. 2 security officers stood posted outside, eyes sharp. They stepped aside without a word. Inside, the room buzzed low with machinery. A cardiac monitor beeped, slow and steady. An IV pump clicked rhythmically beside the bed. A plastic oxygen mask covered the man's mouth and nose, his face wrapped in gauze and tape, barely human, falling under the pressure of machines. Shoulders, broad but hunched, arms resting above the sheets, one wrapped, the other exposed. It was the scar that stopped her breath, a faint white crescent on the inside of his left forearm. A scar from a training accident years ago, when Mason tried to separate 2 fighting canines during a drill, and ended up needing 12 stitches. He'd told that story 100 times, always with the same laugh. Her knees gave out slightly, but she caught herself on the side rail. Echo padded forward. His steps were slow now, not from grief, but from exhaustion. Blood had seeped through the bandage around his paw again, but he didn't falter. He walked to the bedside, sniffed the air once, then again, closer to the patient's face. The ventilator hummed, its rhythm steady. The man didn't move. Echo let out a low whine. Then he did something that removed all doubt. He placed both front paws gently against the side of the bed, careful not to disturb wires or tubes. Then he lowered his head and laid it across the man's chest, directly over his heart. A sound escaped him. A sound Elena had only heard once before, the day Mason left for deployment years ago. It was a whimper too long to be mourning, too quiet to be panic. It was memory, recognition. Elena reached out and gently stroked the man's uncovered hand. The skin was warm, the fingers calloused in the same familiar places. The base of the thumb from weapons training, the knuckle of the index from an old boxing injury. She let her fingers rest there, closed her eyes. "I know you," she whispered. "Even if they tried to erase your face, I know everything else." Lila climbed onto the chair beside her, placing a small, trembling hand on her mother's arm. "Is it Daddy?" Elena looked down at Echo, still resting against the man's body, eyes closed now. Then she looked back at the machines, the slow beep of life uninterrupted. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking. "It's him." She leaned closer, brushing a hand against the wrapped cheek. "I don't know why they buried someone else in your place. I don't know what went wrong, but we're going to fix it, I promise." A knock at the door. Chief Ortega stepped in, followed by Detective Eva Santos. Both were breathless from the rush across town. Ortega's eyes went immediately to the figure on the bed, then to Elena. "Is it him?" "It's Mason," she said without hesitation. Santos's jaw tightened. Echo's breathing. Subtle at first, a change in rhythm, almost unnoticeable beneath the quiet hum of machines and the pulse of regulated air. But Elena caught it, the soft hitch in his exhale, the tensing of his shoulders. She had spent enough nights watching Echo stand sentinel beside a crib, beside a doorway, beside a man he would give his life for, to know what this meant. He smelled something. "Elena?" Chief Ortega asked from near the doorway. "Do you want us to give you a moment?" She didn't answer. Her focus had narrowed. Echo's nose had lifted slightly, then dipped, not toward Mason, but toward the IV stand. His ears flattened, tail stiffened. The low sound that rumbled from his throat wasn't a growl meant for enemies. It was the sound he made when something didn't belong. "Echo?" Elena stepped closer. "What is it, boy?" He shifted again, putting himself between Mason's bed and the IV pole, nose brushing near the base of the line, where the drip met the port. His lips didn't curl, but the growl deepened, steady, controlled, the kind of sound you'd hear from a soldier under pressure. Elena's heart stuttered. As a nurse, she had seen reactions like this, animals reacting to seizure precursors, changes in hormone levels, chemical imbalances. But this wasn't fear. It wasn't anticipation. It was warning. Her hand moved to the IV bag automatically, the years of medical training kicking in. She read the label. Midazolam. Sedative. Dosage, 2 milligrams per hour. Then she glanced at the chart hanging at the foot of the bed. That's when her stomach dropped. Her finger traced the handwritten orders from the trauma team, the assigned dosage. 1 milligrams per hour. Different medication. Not just a mistake. A different compound altogether. Her eyes darted between the chart and the label again. The bag hanging above Mason's head was not what was prescribed. Not even close. Elena? Detective Santos had stepped inside quietly, sensing the shift in air. What's wrong? This drip isn't right, Elena said, barely above a whisper. It's not what the chart says. Ortega stepped closer. Could it be a simple switch? A nurse error? Elena shook her head, even as her fingers moved with practiced certainty to detach the IV line. She caught a faint scent then, sweet, almost syrupy, beneath the alcohol of the surrounding sterility. It triggered something deeper than knowledge. It triggered memory. The smell was faint in it. I think it's ethylene glycol. Santos cursed under her breath. That's antifreeze. It's sweet, Elena said, her hands trembling now. Hard to detect in small doses, metabolizes quickly. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd never find it until it's too late. She looked down at Mason, pale beneath the gauze of machinery, and her throat closed. He's being poisoned. Ortega spun toward the hallway. Get a toxicology kit in here, now! And someone lock down the pharmacy. No one goes in or out without my approval. Santos was already on her radio. This is Detective Ava Santos. I need the CSU team dispatched to St. Helena ICU, room 311. Possible attempted homicide. We need evidence collection on all IVs and intake logs. Confirmed medication tampering. Elena gently pressed the stop flow valve and disconnected the bag, keeping it sealed. Mason stirred faintly beneath his bandages. Just a twitch of his fingers, a pulse shift on the monitor. Echo stepped forward again, resting his chin lightly on Mason's thigh, as if to reassure him. You saved him again, Elena whispered, dropping to her knees beside the dog. You smelled it before anyone else. You always know. Echo did not move, but his tail tapped the floor once, slow and heavy. The ICU nurse returned, eyes wide as she entered. What's happening? This IV bag, Elena said, holding it out. It's not protocol. Someone replaced it. Check every patient's chart on this floor, now. The nurse blanched, then nodded, bolting back toward the nurse's station. Ortega knelt beside Elena, his face drawn. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure Mason didn't survive that raid, he said quietly, and they would have succeeded if it weren't for... He looked at Echo, at the blood on his paws, the stillness in his body, the soft, rasping breath of a dog who had not stopped working. Elena stood slowly, eyes fixed on her husband. We thought he died 3 days ago, she murmured. But the truth is, he's been dying this whole time, and someone made sure we never looked twice. Not anymore, Santos said, standing tall beside them. Now we look at everything. Echo shifted his weight again and sat upright, facing the door like a sentinel reawakened. The scent was gone. The threat, not yet. But they were listening now. And Echo, ever faithful, ever watchful, was already waiting for the next shadow to fall. The silence in the hospital conference room was brittle, the kind that creaked under its own weight. Ava Santos stood with her arms folded tight against her chest, eyes locked on the forensics report just handed to her. The paper was still warm from the printer, but the contents froze her blood. Ethylene glycol, detected, confirmed, active shooter drills. Back when danger came with footsteps and shouting, not IV lines and handwritten labels. Elena sat across the table, her hand clutching the test result as if it might dissolve between her fingers. Beside her, Lila quietly colored a picture of a dog with a superhero cape. Echo lay at their feet, eyes open, body still, but every muscle tuned like wire. He hadn't rested properly in days. The toxicologist, a spectacled man in his late 50s, with a voice made of apology, cleared his throat gently. "It's not just presence," he said. "It's patterned, microdoses. Someone knew exactly how much to use, enough to keep him comatose, enough to avoid triggering alarms in blood work until too late." Elena stared down at the page. "It's slow death. That's what this is." Ava nodded grimly. "And intentional." Echo gave a single thump of his tail, not in joy, but in acknowledgement. He knew that word, intentional. It was the line between mistake and malevolence. The hospital administrator entered just then, pale, breathing through his mouth. "We've completed the first sweep. So far, only Detective Reed's chart appears compromised. But we've initiated an internal lockdown. No non-essential staff, on or off premises, until we finish cross-checking credentials." Ava turned sharply. "I want a list of every person who had clearance to touch Detective Reed's medications in the last 72 hours. Full names, certification numbers, shift logs." The administrator stammered. "We can get that by end of day." "No," she snapped. "Now." Elena didn't flinch at the tone. She appreciated it. This wasn't just about her husband anymore. This was about breach, about betrayal, about someone slipping poison into a man everyone thought was already dead. She looked over at Echo. He hadn't moved, but his body was angled toward the door. "Echo knows who it is," she said quietly. Ava arched an eyebrow. "He knew something was wrong before the chart said so," Elena continued. "He reacted to the IV line. Then he laid across Mason's legs like a barricade. He's not reacting emotionally anymore. He's patrolling." Ava looked at the dog, whose eyes flicked to meet hers for a brief moment, before returning to the hallway. "Then we use that." She turned back to the administrator. "I want Echo cleared to accompany medical staff during the remaining rounds. Full access. He'll do what your scanners can't." The man hesitated. "But he's not a certified medical K9. There are protocols." Navigating waters known to carry mines. Echo walked beside Ava as they made their way back to ICU. He wore a hastily issued medical K9 vest, though the letters had faded from years of disuse. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. He had returned to duty. Outside Mason's room, Elena stood vigil while Lila napped, curled in the chair, her small hand resting on Echo's old service collar. Elena barely blinked when Ava stepped in. "He's stable," she said softly. "Vitals holding." Ava nodded. "And the hospital's combing everything now. Cameras, logs. We'll find who did this." Elena turned and there was steel in her voice. "No, detective, you'll find who helped them. Whoever tried to kill Mason had access, yes, but they also had confidence. Enough to inject poison in a man whose wife works trauma. Enough to assume no one would check twice." She glanced toward her husband. They almost got away with it. That night, Echo refused to leave the room. When the nurses entered, he sniffed every tray. When janitorial staff mopped the floor, he watched their movements without blinking. When a new doctor tried to adjust Mason's monitors, Echo placed himself directly between the man and the bed, eyes narrowed. Only when Ava entered, clipboard in hand, voice low and steady. Did Echo ease back into his spot near the baseboard heater? Not relaxed, not asleep, just waiting. Elena approached him then, kneeling gently. "You feel it, don't you?" she whispered. "It's not over." Echo turned his head slightly, enough to rest his muzzle on her knee. A flicker of warmth in his eyes, but also something else. Burden. As if protecting Mason was no longer just about love. It was now mission. The clock in ICU room 314 ticked with a slow, metronomic patience. Too calm, too clean for the undercurrent pulsing through Elena's chest. Outside the window, the dusk sky bled into indigo. Mason's vitals traced silent rhythms on the monitor beside his bed. The beeps steady but ghost-like, like the pulse of someone almost lost. Echo lay near the foot of the bed, chin resting between his outstretched paws. He hadn't dozed in over 24 hours, and though his frame was weary, his eyes never closed fully. Each shift of hallway light, every brush of shoe rubber against wax tile, Echo registered it. Elena sat in a molded chair beside Mason, fingers gently tracing the edge of his hand. She had just spoken softly to him, about Lila's drawing, about the new baby's kicks, about the scar on his wrist he got opening a stubborn jar of pickles 2 summers ago. These were her lifelines now, cast across silence. Then Echo stirred. They heard it. The squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, calm, rhythmic, approaching. A figure came into view behind the narrow window. A nurse, tall and slender, hair tucked neatly under a cap. She moved with quiet confidence, pushing a small cart bearing IV bags and a clipboard. Her name badge read, Cassandra Voss, RN. She knocked gently and stepped inside. "Evening," she said, voice level, almost warm. "I'm here to update the IV per the new orders." Elena instinctively stood, her eyes flicking from the woman to the cart, then to Echo, who was now fully upright and blocking the space between the bed and the nurse. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, he simply stood there, immovable, watching. Cassandra blinked at him, smile twitching at the corner. "Oh, I heard about you. Echo, right? The famous guardian." Echo's tail didn't wag. His stance shifted lower, paws braced like he was expecting impact. Elena's brow furrowed. "I wasn't told about a change in orders," she said slowly, stepping slightly in front of the bed. Cassandra tilted her head, her smile tightening. It was a verbal from Dr. Calhoun. He asked for a rehydration flush and a pain modulation tweak in case the patient regains consciousness tonight. She lifted a laminated slip. Temporary adjustment. Elena took it, scanned it quickly. Everything looked neat, precise, too precise. Echo took a step forward. Cassandra's hand reached toward the cart, toward a sealed IV bag marked with a handwritten label. But it was the way her fingers moved, swift, practiced, just a hair too fast, that made Elena's heart jolt. The woman's expression faltered for half a second, long enough. And then Elena saw it, the brief flick of her eyes toward the door, the small tick in her cheek, the way her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, a stance not of care but readiness. Echo lunged, not with teeth, not with violence. He placed himself squarely between Cassandra and the IV pole, muzzle low, growling. The sound, a low, vibrating thunder, felt more than heard. His eyes never left hers. "Hey!" Cassandra snapped, stepping back instinctively, her hand gripping the clipboard tighter. "Echo, no," Elena said firmly, but she wasn't calling him off. She was calling attention. Because in that second, the nurse's face shifted. Not startled, not fearful, calculating. It was the look of someone caught too soon. And Cassandra Voss, if that was her name, recovered too quickly. She turned as if to reach for her comms badge, but Echo snapped a warning bark. "Ma'am," Elena said, voice suddenly sharp, nurse instincts on full alert. "Please set the bag down and step back." "I don't have time for this," Cassandra said, voice clipped now. This patient needs stabilizing. Move your dog. But Echo wouldn't move. Instead, he growled deeper. And then, astonishingly, he took the IV bag in his teeth and backed away, gently behind him, like a mother relocating her pup. That's when Elena saw it. The faintest discoloration inside the fluid, barely perceptible. But she'd administered enough drips to spot abnormal tints. She reached for the emergency alarm. Cassandra's face shifted again. This time, to rage. And then, in one seamless motion, Cassandra yanked something from her side pocket. A capped syringe. Elena froze. "Don't!" But Echo had already launched. He slammed into her legs, knocking the syringe to the floor. The door burst open. Detective Eva Santos charged in, taser drawn. "Drop it!" she barked. Cassandra didn't comply. Instead, she reached for the syringe again. And Eva fired. The electric crack filled the room. Cassandra jerked backward, crashing into the IV stand, then slid to the floor, twitching. Elena stood trembling, hand over her mouth, heart jackhammering. Echo stood over Mason once more, breathing hard, but never breaking focus. Eva cuffed Cassandra swiftly. "We got her. We got her." Elena turned to Echo, dropped to her knees beside him. He was panting, tongue lolling slightly, but otherwise composed. His body shook. Whether from adrenaline or exhaustion, she couldn't tell. "You knew," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You knew before any of us." Echo closed his eyes briefly. A breath, a release. But then they fluttered open again. There was still more to guard, still more to finish. There's a moment after violence, brief, suspended, where breath forgets itself. Patricia de la Cruz lay crumpled against the ICU cabinet. The taser prongs embedded in her shoulder, still quivering from the charge. Her nurse's scrubs were rumpled, a name badge hanging sideways, meaningless now. She blinked slowly, as if waking from a dream. But there was no disorientation in her eyes, only calculation, simmering like oil over flame. Detective Eva Santos lowered the taser slightly, not fully, her stance wide, centered. "Hands where I can see them," she ordered, stepping closer. Elena stayed frozen near Mason's bedside, one hand hovering protectively over his chest. Echo stood in front, the words curling with pride. "This is family." She reached into her waistband. Eva leveled the taser again. "Don't!" But Patricia didn't pull a weapon, not immediately. She pulled a laminated photo, tossed it toward Ava's feet. It was a security cam image, black and white. Two men, one easily recognizable as Mason, the other a broad-shouldered man in a tailored suit, face half-turned but familiar to anyone following the cartel files. Elias de la Cruz. Patricia raised her chin. "My cousin doesn't forgive betrayal." Elena's eyes widened. Eva remained still. Patricia continued, her words unspooling like venom. That night at the warehouse, Mason wasn't supposed to walk away, but he did. And that dog, she nodded toward Echo, whose teeth now bared slightly. That damned dog dragged him out of the fire. Elias has been cleaning up loose ends ever since. She reached into her pocket again, and this time the motion was practiced, purposeful. A syringe, clear, viscous. Elena's breath stilled. Ava's fingers twitched on the taser. Patricia held the needle to her neck. I inject this and I don't talk. No trial, no leverage, no names. She smiled. He'll never know what Mason remembered. Ava took a step forward. Put it down. You don't want to do this. Oh, but I do, Patricia said, voice trembling with a strange serenity. I was trained to do this. I'm not afraid of dying for him. That's the difference between you and us. But Echo was already moving. With a soft, strangled yelp, he stumbled sideways, collapsing against the cabinet. Elena gasped. Echo? Patricia's eyes snapped to him. Her smile curved cruelly. Oh no, not the hero. She lowered the syringe from her neck just slightly, turning to gloat, just as Echo's eyes flicked up, sharp and full of fire. It was a feint. He surged up from the floor, knocking the cart with a clang. The motion startled Patricia into jerking backward, and her syringe hand lifted again. That was all Ava needed. The taser fired. Again. Patricia's body convulsed as electricity surged through her. The syringe clattered to the tile and rolled beneath the counter. She crumpled like a marionette with its strings cut. Silence crashed back into the room. The only sound, the high-pitched beep of Mason's heart monitor, steady and stubborn. Elena exhaled a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Her knees wobbled beneath her. She rushed to Echo's side. You tricked her, she whispered, falling to her. You're Patricia de la Cruz, born in Caracas, raised in San Diego. Arrested once under alias Mina Velez, booked for illegal arms possession, suspected links to cartel medical laundering. Patricia only smiled, blood in her teeth. I was closer than you think. Ava ignored her. You're going to answer for this. For Mason, for Jensen, for everyone. She turned to Echo, who was now licking his own paw, nonchalant as if he hadn't just orchestrated a tactical takedown worthy of SWAT training. Ava gave him a nod of respect. Hell of a partner you've got here. Elena, still crouched, ran her hand gently down Echo's neck. He knew, before we ever did. Outside the room, the sound of security boots echoed down the hall. The hospital was locking down. Lights overhead dimmed slightly to alert staff of the emergency protocol. Echo stood slowly, limping but proud, and walked back to Mason's bedside. He settled beside the man he refused to give up on. He would keep watch, still, no matter how many came for them. The cuffs clinked faintly as Patricia de la Cruz was led away under armed escort, her head held oddly high for someone whose plan had just unraveled at the feet of a dog. Her stare lingered on Mason, still unconscious, bandaged, motionless, before vanishing behind the metal swing doors of the ICU. Ava Santos stood watching, her jaw clenched. Lock every shift down. I want her visitor logs, call records, aliases, everything. If she had help in this hospital, I want it scrubbed out by sundown. But the adrenaline in the room was already draining, leaving behind a heaviness, an aftershock more subtle, but more frightening. Elena knelt beside Echo, her hands trembling as they brushed through the thick fur of his neck. He was lying now, not alert like before. His chest rose slowly, too slowly. His eyes, normally alert, wise, seemed dulled, clouded with something she couldn't name but deeply feared. "Echo?" she whispered, coaxing. He blinked at her, weakly, then retched. A wet, sick sound cracked the sterile silence. He tried to rise but stumbled. A second heave brought up thick bile, tinged with pink and yellow. "God, no!" Elena dropped to her knees beside him, voice cracking. "No, baby, not now." Ava turned, startled. "What's wrong with him?" "He's vomiting," Elena said, brushing trembling fingers against his gums. "And his breath, it's sweet. Not dog sweet, chemical sweet." Her eyes widened. "No." "What?" Elena looked up, her voice barely holding together. "Antifreeze. Ethylene glycol," Elena said, suddenly urgent, loud. "Now! Emergency toxicology. He needs fomepizole or ethanol. Anything to stop the metabolic conversion. We don't have much time." Ava was already on the phone, barking orders. "Get the on-call veterinary unit. Yes, for a working canine. Critical condition. Bring antidotes for antifreeze poisoning. Yes, liver support too. You'll be escorted past perimeter." Lila was still in the waiting room with the nurse, unaware that her world might be falling apart again. Elena cradled Echo's head in her lap, whispering softly now, as if her voice could anchor him. "You saved him, sweetheart. You found the wrong coffin. You stopped her. You told me with your eyes. You've done everything, Echo. You've done enough." Echo exhaled weakly. His body, usually tense and watchful, felt heavier than she remembered. His paw twitched, then curled slightly. Elena pressed her cheek to the top of his head. "I won't let you go down for this," she murmured. "Not you. Not for being the only one who never stopped protecting." A crash of the door broke the moment. A rush of blue scrubs, and a vet with a med kit slung over her shoulder, like a soldier entering battle. "Where's the patient?" the vet asked. Elena pointed to Echo. "German Shepherd, roughly 7 years. Exposure to ethylene glycol, maybe ingestion. Vomiting, lethargy, sweet breath. Suspected renal onset." The vet didn't ask further questions. She dropped to her knees, pulled open the bag, and began setting up IVs. "We'll start with fomepizole. If it's early enough, we can prevent it from metabolizing. If not, we'll need to start fluids and hope to slow the damage." Ava knelt nearby, silent, her badge forgotten. The vet inserted the needle into Echo's vein with practiced speed. "He's a police dog?" Elena nodded. "He's still on duty?" "Always," she whispered. The antidote began its slow drip. Echo flinched slightly but didn't move away. His eyes fluttered, catching the overhead light for a breathless moment, then closing again. Elena leaned in close. "Stay, please, just a little longer." The vet checked his pulse. "It's thin, but there. The next few hours are critical. If he starts seizing or his kidneys just connected to the cartel." She was working under a false identity for over 6 months. Assigned directly to this hospital's ICU rotation after the raid. This was a long play. Elena swallowed. "And Echo cracked it open with a single growl." Ava nodded, then added quietly, "He's more than a dog." "I know," Elena said, her voice thick. "That's why it hurts like this." She didn't cry. She sat between two fighters and waited for breath to steady, for hearts to heal, for sleep to pass without loss. Outside the ICU, the wind pressed gently against the windows, as if Echo's name was now carried on it, part of something larger than fear, than survival, a presence, still on watch, still not done. The machines were quieter today, not silent but steadier. The ventilator hissed in rhythm now, not urgency. And on the cardiac monitor, the line that once quivered with uncertainty had found a slow, tentative beat. Elena sat beside Mason's bed, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee she hadn't touched in hours. The ICU still smelled like antiseptic and fear, but something in the air had changed. She couldn't name it, not yet. Echo lay curled at the base of Mason's bed, no longer tethered to IVs but not fully himself. His eyes tracked every movement in the room with half-lidded caution. His breaths were deeper now, but still lacked the sharpness of his old readiness. His tail didn't wag, it rested. Lila had been taken home by Elena's sister, tucked into bed with reassurances no one believed. Elena reached for Mason's hand. His skin was warm, not the false warmth of machines, but something quietly returning from within. Then she saw it, a twitch. His index finger moved, barely perceptible, but not involuntary. She blinked, heart lurching. "Mason?" No response. But there it was again, another twitch. And then the subtlest tightening of his jaw. "Mason," she whispered, leaning in closer. "It's me. I'm here." She didn't know if he could hear her, but she knew she had to believe he could. Across the room, Echo stirred. He rose slowly, as though listening to something beyond the frequencies of human hearing. Then, as if drawn by instinct rather than thought, he padded to the bedside. Elena made space, her breath caught. Echo lifted his head, placed it gently on Mason's chest, and let out a soft, low whimper. The sound barely rose above a hum. It wasn't a cry of pain nor a bark of alarm. It was a sound Elena hadn't heard in weeks. It was the sound Echo made every morning just before Mason would finish lacing his boots, pat Echo's head and say, "Ready, partner?" The same whimper that always came before duty, before they walked out the door into the unknown together. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Mason again, her voice cracking. "Can you hear him?" She leaned close, forehead nearly against his. "Your partner's here," she said, her tears finally breaking. "He never left." Another twitch, this time in Mason's eyelids, a flicker beneath their closed lids, as if shadows were moving behind them. A nurse walking by paused at the doorway. "Mrs. Reyes?" Elena turned, tears streaking her cheeks. I think he's trying." The nurse stepped in, watching Mason's monitors.
"There's definite neural response. That's new."
She didn't touch anything. She simply watched Echo with a reverent kind of hush.
"He hasn't made that sound since the last time they went on patrol together,"
Elena murmured.
"Every morning. Same sound, same place."
The nurse swallowed.
"I've seen coma patients move before, but I've never seen them listen."
That night, Elena refused to leave. She pulled a chair closer and curled into it, hand resting on Mason's wrist, her head tilted toward the foot of the bed, where Echo now lay, standing vigil again. They were two broken warriors, side by side, one trapped inside his own mind, the other clawing his way back from the edge of death. Around 2:17 a.m., Mason's fingers curled around Elena's hand. Just once. But enough to make her sit up, heart in her throat.
"Do it again,"
she begged.
"Please."
But he didn't. Instead, Echo lifted his head again, climbed onto the edge of the bed, something he never did unless invited, and pressed his body along Mason's side, not crushing, just anchoring. And for the first time in days, Elena thought she saw peace settle in the lines of her husband's face, like he was no longer drifting alone. By morning, the staff noticed. The word spread slowly but firmly. Mason Reyes, presumed dead and wrongly buried, was showing signs of waking. The headlines hadn't caught up yet, but in this quiet room, the war was turning. Why now? Ava asked later, eyes flicking between Elena and Echo. Because something familiar found him, Elena answered. Something real. A sound he'd known for years, calling him back. Ava studied Echo for a long time.
He's not done yet, is he?
Elena shook her head. None of us are. At first, there was only the ceiling, white, endless, like cloud cover just before a storm. Mason blinked once, slowly, as if each movement of his eyelid required permission from somewhere deeper than muscle. Everything hurt, but not in the sharp, definable way pain usually came. This was different. His body felt submerged, slow, heavy, removed. He tried to move, but it pulled back loosely. Her eyes tired, but whole. She wasn't crying. She didn't need to. Every part of her face said, "You came back to me." "Hey, Mason," she whispered, placing a hand over his. That one touch made something shudder deep within him. Not pain, not even recognition, just belonging. She leaned forward. "You're safe now." Her fingers traced his palm, and for a moment he remembered. Nights curled around her pregnant belly, the scent of pine on her sweater, the way she'd breathe his name when she was afraid, but pretending not to be. He wanted to answer. He wanted to say, "I'm here." But the tube down his throat stole his voice. It whirred softly as he breathed. Still, she understood. Tears filled her eyes as she pressed her forehead to the back of his hand. "You came back." He blinked once, slow, deliberate. Elena turned quickly toward the door. "Nurse! I think he's awake. He's responding." Shoes tapped quickly on linoleum. Monitors stirred, voices hushed. But none of it mattered. Because through the small opening near the door, a shadow moved. Lila. Still in her pajama pants, one of Mason's old hoodies nearly swallowing her tiny frame, she stood frozen in the doorway, a crayon still tucked behind one ear. She hadn't let go of it in 2 days. "Mama?" she asked, cautious. Elena turned, her eyes softening. "Come here, sweetheart." Lila walked slowly, as if unsure this wasn't another adult mirage, like the ones they'd gently used to say, "Daddy's sleeping," or "He's getting better." But when she reached the bedside, her eyes, so like Mason's, met his. He blinked again. And again. Then, with trembling effort, he shifted his gaze, just enough to follow her hand as she placed it gently beside his. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. "I brought your favorite cereal when you wake up, but it's kinda soggy now." He tried to smile. His lips twitched. The slightest movement, but it changed the entire room. Elena covered her mouth, laughter tangled with tears. The nurse quietly backed out, giving them space. But it wasn't until the next moment that Mason's world completed its return. Because then, "You good there? I'm with you." The moment shattered Elena's composure. She pressed a fist to her chest as if trying to hold her heart from falling out. Lila sniffled and leaned into her mother's side. "He remembers," she whispered. "Echo knew he would." Echo didn't move, just let Mason scratch until the hand fell back exhausted. He exhaled deeply, almost a sigh, then looked at Elena again, and this time, in his eyes, there wasn't confusion, there was knowing. Later, after the machines settled, after they'd suctioned the ventilator and dimmed the room for rest, Elena sat beside the bed again, stroking Mason's arm. He was sleeping now, healing, but she kept glancing at Echo, who hadn't moved from the bedside. "Thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. Echo shifted slightly, eyes not leaving Mason. She reached over and rested her hand on the dog's back. "You brought him home." And for just a moment, just a breath, Echo's tail thumped once, softly. Morning light drifted through the half-closed blinds, painting slow stripes across the room. It found Mason's face first, no longer a blur of bandages, but a man awakening to the weight of memory. His eyes were clearer today, though rimmed with exhaustion. Behind them something flickered like a bulb, fighting for current. Elena sat beside him, chart in hand, jotting vitals the night nurse had left unfinished. Echo lay curled on a thin blanket at Mason's feet, one ear cocked toward every sound. A monitor beep, a hallway cart, the hush of Elena's breath. He'd slept only in intervals, always waking if Mason shifted more than a sigh. A light knock preceded Detective Ava Santos. She entered quietly, a soft-spined notebook tucked beneath her arm. Her gaze flicked to Mason, then to Echo, then settled on Elena with a silent question. "He's lucid in short bursts," Elena whispered. "Doctor thinks the swelling's down enough to start gentle questioning." Ava stepped closer. "We'll go slow." Mason turned at the sound of her voice. Recognition slid across his features like dawn over frost, subtle but undeniable. He tried to speak, but the trach collar hissed, words failing. Elena squeezed his hand. "Just nod for yes, shake for no. We'll fill the gaps." Ava pulled a chair nearer. "Mason, do you remember the warehouse?" His brow furrowed. A moment passed, then he nodded once. "Good," Ava murmured. "We know. Entry teams Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie breached at 22:14. Do you remember anything unusual before the first shot?" Mason closed his eyes. The steady beep of the monitor quickened. Echo rose, paws clicking as he moved to Mason's side, pressing his head gently against the man's hip as though to anchor him. Elena felt the muscles in Mason's forearm tighten beneath her fingers. Finally his eyes opened again, distant, yet focused inward. He lifted his right fingers, then a curve. "He's writing," Elena interpreted. "Two men? Balcony?" Mason nodded emphatically. Ava jotted. "Unlisted shooters in the rafters. That explains the blind side." She leaned forward. "The first hit. Did you see who fired?" Mason's lips parted. A faint rasp escaped, but no voice. Frustration creased his brow. Echo emitted a soft whine, and Mason's hand drifted, almost unconsciously, to scratch behind the dog's ear, their private signal of calm. "Take your time," Elena whispered. "Picture it like you're back there." He shut his eyes again. Images tumbled behind them. Splintered wood, muzzle flashes, the metallic scream of ricochets. He inhaled sharply, then lifted his hand, traced the outline of long hair tucked into a cap, then tapped his own cheekbone, just beneath the eye. Ava's heartbeat stumbled. Cassandra Voss. She was wearing eye-level safety goggles. That mark. The scar, she murmured, half to herself. She was on site, pretending to be EMT support. Mason's eyes flashed open. He stared at Ava, a flare of urgency sparking in the blue. He squeezed Elena's hand, hard. "You saw her pull the trigger?" Ava pressed. He nodded once, deliberately, then used 2 fingers to mimic a syringe jab to his forearm. Elena's breath caught. "She shot you, then followed as EMT to finish the job." Echo's ears flattened, a low growl vibrating through his chest, as if the memory alone threatened the room. Ava exhaled, pulse thudding. Your testimony ties her to the shooting and the poisoning. This is the thread that unravels the Dela Cruz cover. Mason's gaze wandered to Echo. His hand, still resting on the dog's head, tapped twice, another code from their years together. Good boy, stay close. Echo's tail thumped once, but his eyes never left his partner. Ava sat back. We'll arrange an on-camera deposition the moment the doctors clear you for 30 minutes of exertion. She paused. Mason, the cartel's lawyers will argue you're compromised. We need clarity. Are you certain about Voss? His jaw tightened. Slowly, painstakingly, he lifted his hand again, forming a single circle in the air, then stabbing his finger through its center. Bullseye. Absolute. Elena felt tears she hadn't planned. Echo, sensing the shift, nudged his head beneath Mason's palm. Mason's fingers curled, scratching that familiar spot just behind the ear. Signal returned, trust renewed. A quiet exhale left Mason's lungs, the monitor easing back to steady. For a moment, the room held its breath with him. Later, after Ava left to file the affidavit, Elena adjusted Mason's pillows. You did it. Guard straight along the bed's edge. The vet had warned kidney values were hovering. No crisis, but no comfort. Yet here he was, refusing to relinquish post. Elena ran her hand down Echo's back. He stayed because you were still in there. He knew. Mason's fingers tapped the mattress, spelling out a shaky Morse, E-O, Echo. Elena smiled through tears. Yes, Echo, always. The monitor beeped softly, a heartbeat easing into rhythm with a dog's slow breaths and a woman's quiet prayers. Somewhere beyond the walls, sirens wailed, elevators chimed, the world kept spinning. But in this small rectangle of light, truth had finally surfaced, pulled up by claws, devotion, and the thin, unbreakable thread of partnership. Mason closed his eyes, not in retreat, but in rest. And Echo, sensing permission at last, let his head drop, exhaling the softest sigh, a sound like doors unlocking in Mason's mind, swinging wide to let him walk, step by aching step, back into the living world. The canine training facility sat squat and colorless on the edge of the industrial district, a concrete island surrounded by chain-link, floodlights, and the distant rattle of freight trains. On most mornings, the kennels roared with barks and handlers' commands, but that February dawn was hushed, as if the building itself understood a fragile oath was about to be tested. Officer Mason Reed stepped from his truck and paused. Frost clung to the barbed wire, breath plumed in front of him. A thin ache pulsed at the base of his skull, remnant of the funeral 2 weeks prior, of polished boots and folded flags, and a partner lowered into ground that still felt too cold to accept him. Everyone said grief came in waves, but Mason felt it more like echo, a hollow ringing that followed each heartbeat, reminding him of the silence where a voice used to be. Sergeant Catherine Walsh met him at the side entrance, clipboard tucked under one arm. Her jaw was set, her eyes soft, compassion wrapped in command. "He's in Kennel 7, she said without greeting. Mason nodded, rubbing chilled knuckles. "How bad?" "Won't eat if someone's watching, won't follow a single order in English or German. Last handler tried a choke chain." Her lips thinned. "Dog nearly hung himself rather than heal." They walked the corridor, cement floor, chlorine scent, metal clatters. Dogs pressed muzzles to the bars, tails whipping, all eager for the day's work. all except the last enclosure on the left. Kennel number 7 was silent. Inside, a German shepherd lay with Lou out under fire, stayed pressed against his body until paramedics forced him off. Some canines snapped when their partners died. Echo simply folded in on himself, a star imploding. Walsh opened the gate halfway. He's on the retirement list. Department wants to adopt him out. To a nice family. The sarcasm cut. But dogs have lost their reason, don't always make polite house pets. Mason crouched outside the gate, careful not to enter, proximity without intrusion. He understood that language. After his own partner, Logan, bled out on Blacktop 6 months ago, Mason stopped sitting with the squad at roll call. He'd stand by the door instead, close enough to serve, far enough to keep ghosts from brushing his shoulder. He set his duty cap on the concrete and spoke, voice calm, ordinary, like he were talking baseball stats over burnt coffee. "Morning, Echo. Weather says we might get flurries before noon. Hope they're wrong, my heater's out in the cruiser." The dog's ear twitched. Nothing more. Walsh folded her arms. "We've given him 4 handlers. He stares at walls until we leave. Eats only at night. Clocks are ticking, Reed." "Give me 4 weeks," Mason said, never taking his eyes off Echo. "Department gave the others 1, Walsh replied. Mason's mouth tipped in a shadow of a grin. "Then they didn't need him enough." Walsh snapped the clipboard shut. "Keys'll be at the front desk, but if he so much as growls wrong, you pull out. I won't bury another cop this quarter." Mason's grin vanished. "Neither will I." Mason arrived each morning before sunrise, Firmus in hand. He'd sit cross-legged outside Kennel 7, back to the bars, reading the Denver Post aloud. Box scores, classified ads, obituaries, mundane lifelines in a world newly strange. He left a threadbare undershirt inside each night, retrieving it at dawn, so Echo could map his scent to time. He never reached through the bars, never forced a command. Wolves, his grandfather taught him, came closer to still water than to running men. Echo watched. Nothing more. On day 10, while Mason read a column about the mayor's pothole initiative, he heard movement behind him, a soft click of nails. He kept reading, voice steady. "City allocates $2.8 million for asphalt repair. Bet you're thrilled, buddy." Echo had moved, 3 feet closer. His ears were forward, eyes not hostile, but measuring, like a soldier studying a new terrain. Thin as thread. Mason halted, pulse banging. He turned. Echo stood at the gate, tail lifted, not wagging, but charged. "He wants to work," Mason told Walsh, adrenaline lighting his voice. "He hasn't certified in months," she argued. "He's ready," Mason insisted. Minutes later, search grid deployed. Mason knelt, offering Echo Annie's pink blanket. The dog inhaled once, then stormed into the storm like a bullet through glass. The training yard he set no obstacles, called no drills. Instead, he sat on the bleachers reading aloud from Peter Matheson, from baseball box scores, from the Velveteen Rabbit, words of wilderness, losses, and made real love. Echo lay at his feet, ears twitching to each new cadence, gradually folding into rest. Days slid into weeks. Small things shifted. Echo began to eat with the lights on. When Mason tossed a battered tennis ball, the dog watched it roll, considered. Then, on one extraordinary afternoon, jogged after it, returning with a soft grip and a questioning gaze that said, "Do we do this now?" Mason laughed for the first time in half a year. He did not throw the ball again. He simply ruffled Echo's ears and tucked the moment like a photograph into memory. Walsh, passing the yard, noted progress in a single raised eyebrow. "Slow burn," she muttered. "Worth the wait," Mason replied. Late-season storm warnings arrived on a Tuesday. Arctic front. 6 inches by nightfall, dropping temps. Walsh released the dogs early, but Mason lingered to finish paperwork. Snow was already dusting the tire ruts when a dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Missing child, age 5, last seen backyard, 312 Birch Avenue, wearing red coat. Possible wander into construction tract." The address lay 5 minutes north. Protocol said certified dogs only, and Echo's evaluation remained weeks away. But something lit in the shepherd's eyes as Mason keyed the mic. A low whine, half plea, half promise. Mason looked at him. "You want in, partner?" Echo's tail lifted, not wagging, more a banner catching wind. They loaded into the cruiser. Mason's pulse hammered the whole drive. Was he reckless, desperate? Or did he simply believe that broken creatures recognize the lost quicker than anyone? At Birch Avenue, snow clawed sideways across yards. Officers combed with flashlights, voices muffled by wool scarves. A sobbing mother clutched a teddy bear at the porch steps. Mason approached command, introducing Echo with a quiet, probationary canine. The sergeant eyed the dog's civilian collar but nodded. "We use every tool when the clock bleeds seconds." Mason knelt, offering Echo the girl's knit hat, apple red against white drift. "Find her," he whispered. No German command, no hand signal, just faith. Echo sniffed, ears rotating, body shifting from house pet to instrument. Without hesitation, he trotted toward the cul-de-sac, where new houses framed a skeletal maze of half-poured foundations. Mason followed, radioing location. They traversed chain-link gates, Echo nose weaving against the gust. Twice, but frigid as stone, the child sat huddled, red coat dusted white, lips pale but moving. She wouldn't come when Mason called. Fear rooted her. Echo solved that. He crawled down the steps, lay belly flat on the concrete, and inched forward until his muzzle touched her mitten. A soft chuff left his chest. The little girl's sob hitched, then fell silent. She reached for his fur. Echo allowed her to grip an ear like rope, while Mason descended, wrapping a blanket around them both. When medics carried the child to the ambulance, Echo trotted at the gurney's side, tail sailing now, full, free, a flag in new territory. Back at the facility, Mason toweled snowmelt from Echo's coat. The dog pressed against his legs. That tennis ball gaze saying, "What next?" Mason laughed again, a sound no longer foreign. Sergeant Walsh watched from the doorway. "Evaluation panels tomorrow," she said. "But after tonight, consider him reinstated." Mason looked at Echo, then back. "We were never out." Walsh's stern facade cracked into a smile. "Bring him home, Reed." Elena opened the front door to the smell of wet fur and pine. She wore Mason's old academy hoodie, baby bump rounding beneath. Her tired eyes brightened when she saw Echo enter, nose sweeping hallway corners like a soldier clearing rooms. "He's bigger than I imagined," she breathed. "He's gentle," Mason said, voice soft. He watched Echo approach the couch where Elena had stacked baby books. The dog sniffed once, then lay down. front paws crossed, guard position at ease. Later, as Mason and Elena stood brushing their teeth, Echo settled on the bedroom rug. Rain stains pattered the window. Furnace rattled awake.
Does it feel crowded?
He asked.
She shook her head, smiling around a toothbrush. Feels right.
Mason glanced down. Echo's amber eyes reflected lamplight. For the first time since Logan's death, Mason felt the echo inside him shift, from hollow ring to steady drum, synchronized with another heartbeat in the room. He knelt, scratched behind Echo's ear, their secret handshake. Echo leaned in, exhaling a contented sigh. Outside, wind hushed. Snow ceased its tapping. Somewhere, the saved child slept warm. A mother whispered thanks into darkened air. And in a small house on Juniper Lane, two bruised souls discovered that trust, once reborn, is a fire against every blizzard the world can muster.
The summer after Echo's reinstatement settled over Juniper Lane like a warm quilt. Sunlight poured across the hardwood each dawn, and Mason could time his coffee by the pads of Echo's feet padding in
every slow reach of her arms. When she stepped into the bathroom at 3 a.m., uneasy with the baby's kicks, Echo rose from the foot of the bed and took up guard outside the door without a sound. Mason woke each time to the soft click-click of nails and never tried to call him back. Some promises weren't meant to be interrupted. One afternoon, Elena eased herself onto the porch swing, ankles swollen above Mason's battered police cooler packed with ice. Echo settled at her feet, nose tipped toward her belly as if listening for classified intel. Elena stroked the fur between his ears. "You feel her, don't you?" she whispered. The dog answered by pressing his head gently against the curve of her stomach. Inside, the baby kicked. Outside, Echo's tail thumped, and Mason, watching from the living room window, felt the walls of the house expand in quiet gratitude. That night, Mason wrote a single line in his journal. "There is another heartbeat in our home, and Echo keeps time for us all." Labor struck early on a rain-slick October morning. Not water breaking, not alarms, just a shift in Echo. He paced the hallway, low whine rising, until Mason stirred. Elena, bleary-eyed, waved off concern until the first contraction bent her breath in half. When the paramedics arrived, Echo trotted beside the gurney to the doorway, refusing to retreat until Mason buckled him into the cruiser. At St. Grace's maternity ward, hospital rules barred canines, but Echo parked himself by the automatic doors, unmoving through 10 hours and 2 meal offers from security. Nurses joked he was tougher than most new dads. Mason, pacing inside the delivery suite, believed it. Lila Rose Reed announced herself with a cry that sounded to Mason like the first note of a hymn. When mother and child returned home, Echo greeted them with a sniff gentle enough to keep a soap bubble intact. He circled the car seat once, then lay on the floor, spine parallel to the plastic base, forming a living bumper. The crib was stationed against the nursery's south wall. Echo learned the guard schedule without being asked. Daytime naps from the doorway, head on paws, eyes half shut, night duty pressed full length beneath the crib slats. His breathing synced to the metronome squeak of the mobile overhead. If Lila whimpered, Echo rose, padded down the hall, and nudged Mason awake with a single measured poke of the muzzle. No barking, no panic, just your shift, partner. Mason began calling him the other heartbeat. Months passed in soft montage. Lila's first giggle when Echo's tail swept dust bunnies into sunlight. The dog's disciplined stillness while Mason clipped infant fingernails inches from sensitive ears. Saturday mornings when Echo trotted beside the stroller, scanning every hedge like a Secret Service advance. Mason's academy graduation shot. Guests often pause between the two pictures, noting how both partners wore the same quiet confidence. But time wrote its small edits. A gray hair bloomed at Echo's muzzle, another streaked along his shoulders. His sprints turned to steady lopes. On one winter jog he paused, lifted a paw against the chill. Mason knelt, rubbing warmth into the pad, and felt a ripple of dread he couldn't name. He carried Echo home that morning, cradling 80 pounds of loyal muscle as snowflakes needled his cheeks. Inside, Elena met them with blankets and cocoa. "He's just tired," she reassured. Mason folded into the couch, Echo's head on his thigh, and pretended he believed it. The memories spun around Mason now, present-day hospital beeps merging with recalled lullabies. In the ICU's hush, he rested a hand on Echo's mottled fur, tracing the grays like mile markers on a road they had traveled together. He remembered the night Lila spiked a fever, Elena rocked a baby, Mason dialed nurses' lines, Echo paced a 3-foot sentry loop until the pediatrician returned their call. He remembered Lila's first steps, stumbling toward Echo, not her parents, chubby fingers gripping the shepherd's ruff like a climbing rope. Echo had stood statue still, letting her discover after siren, until the lesson lived in their very blood. Mason closed his eyes, listening. Machine pulses, Elena humming, Echo's breath, 3 metronomes, 1 song. Home. Echo's nails clicked in a syncopated rhythm against the ICU tiles. A steady metronome Mason could follow, even with his eyes closed. The shepherd had insisted on these rounds twice a night, circling the nurses' station, sniffing every linen cart, pausing at each doorway long enough to reassure himself the world was still in its rightful place. Tonight, Mason listened from his bed, ventilator gone, but oxygen cannula whispering faint breaths. Elena sat beside him, flipping a paperback, but reading none of the words. Her attention darted to the doorway whenever Echo's silhouette passed. At 02:17, the metronome faltered. Click, 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 silence. Mason's eyes flew open. Echo? No answer. Then a dull thud, as if a body had given way to gravity just beyond the threshold. Elena was on her feet before the monitor caught her heart spike. She rushed into the hall and found Echo slumped on his side, legs twitching as if running inside a dream he couldn't finish. A disposable glove lay beneath his muzzle, licked clean of some scent he'd tried to catalog seconds before collapse. "Help!" Elena's voice cracked glass-sharp through the quiet ward. 2 nurses sprinted over, kneeling on either side of the dog. One checked pupils with a penlight, the other pressed fingers into Echo's femoral artery, brow knitting at the sluggish pulse. Mason tried to swing his legs off the bed. Tubes and leads snagged. A nurse rushed in to keep him from tearing out IV lines. "Stay, officer. Let them work." But Mason's gaze stayed locked on the doorway, where Echo's tail lay curled like a question mark left unanswered. By dawn, Echo occupied a gurney in the hospital's small veterinary suite, a space usually reserved for therapy dogs. Dr. Angela Morrison, called back on emergency, inserted a catheter while an aide drew dark viscous blood into vials. Mason, wheelchair-bound, hovered in the doorway. Elena stood behind him, hands gripping the chair handles so tightly her knuckles blanched. "Tell me straight, Doc." Mason rasped. Morrison stripped gloves, sighing. His gums are icteric, yellow tint. That's liver. And his abdomen's tender. We'll know more once the panel runs, but the collapse fits. The analyzer beeped. Numbers scrolled. ALT, AST, bilirubin, each one edged with inevitability. With aggressive meds and dialysis, maybe a month. Without, a week, 2 at best. The damage is too advanced for transplant protocols. Elena's breath left her in a soundless whoosh. She moved around the chair and knelt beside Echo, burying a hand in his scruff. The dog's eyes fluttered open, cloudy but searching. He tried to wag. The tail barely twitched. "You gave everything, sweetheart," she murmured. "Everything." Back in Mason's room, Dr. Reeves hung Mason's newest lab results: kidney function near normal, vitals stabilizing. Good news that felt heavy. Mason stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the hospital. Each sound suddenly too bright, too cruel. Echo's IV pump clicked somewhere down the hall. Rhythm uneven. Ava Santos arrived mid-morning, file in hand. "Trials fast-tracked. Your deposition sealed Cassandra's fate. DA says Echo's testimony in paw prints is front-page hero stuff." She tried to smile. It faltered when she caught Mason's eyes. "He's dying," Mason said simply. Ava's mouth opened, closed. She set the file aside. I'll tell the DA we need time." Mason shook his head. "Echo's already given us time. We use it." That evening the treatment began. Fluids laced with antioxidants. A drug cocktail dripped slow to delay the inevitable cascade. Lila colored on the floor, careful not to tug the lines that snaked from Echo's foreleg. She drew a picture. A huge brown dog wearing a cape. A smaller stick-figure man beside him, labeled Daddy. A son in the corner, smiling. She taped it to the IV pole. Mason wheeled closer, lifting Echo's heavy head onto his thigh. "Remember the drainage tunnel, partner?" he whispered. "You dragged me through mud and didn't complain once. I owe you so many walks in the park for that." Echo's eyes slid half shut. He let out a soft sigh, content, or weary, or both. Elena stroked Mason's hair. "He hears you." Mason swallowed. "I need him to know I'll get the job done. He can rest if he needs." Echo's ear twitched, the faintest acknowledgement. The monitor displayed his heart at 55 beats per minute. Each one a quiet footstep retreating down a hall Mason wasn't ready to let him walk alone. Night deepened. Nurses dimmed corridor lights. Machines whispered. Mason dozed upright, hand still on Echo's ribcage, rising and falling like slow tide. Elena sat across from them, journaling symptoms, dosing times, something to rest the hush. "I'm safe. Because of you, I'm safe." Somewhere down the hall, a monitor chimed in another room. Life insisted. And here, inside this pocket of fluorescent half-light, the cost of loyalty tallied itself in enzymes and exhausted breaths. Yet Mason knew, with certainty that cut through pain, if the moment rewound, Echo would drink the poison again. That knowledge, terrible and holy, settled on Mason's chest like a medal no ceremony could ever bestow. They tried gently to separate them. The charge nurse explained infection control protocols. Dr. Reeves referenced sterile fields and species cross-contamination. Even the veterinary tech offered a compromise. "Just overnight, Officer Reed. He'll be 2 doors away." Mason listened, nodding politely while strapping a portable IV pole to the back of his wheelchair. When the last syllable faded, he simply said, "He stays." The conviction in his voice left no space for rebuttal. And because every person in that corridor had heard how Echo clawed through oak to expose a funeral lie, how he sniffed antifreeze through sealed plastic to save a man dying drop by drop, they stepped aside. By dusk, room 417 had been rearranged like a makeshift field infirmary. Mason's hospital bed angled toward the window. Along the opposite wall, maintenance wheeled in a love-seat-sized couch liberated from the staff lounge. Over its cushions, the vet taped clear plastic, then threaded an infusion line from a portable pump. Saline, antioxidants, liver support meds, bags hanging like quiet paper lanterns above Echo's head. Helena tucked a fleece blanket, Lila's favorite, covered in fading cartoon suns, around the dog's haunches. Echo's breathing wheezed unevenly, each inhale a negotiation. Still, when orderlies entered to adjust furniture, his ears twitched upward and a weak rumble rolled in his chest. Stranger, observe. Mason, propped on pillows, smiled despite the ache beneath his ribs. Some instincts don't take sick days. Echo turned at the sound of his voice. The heavy tail brushed once against the plastic. Lila arrived just after dinner rounds, cheeks pink from a sprint down the hall. Clutched against her chest, a frayed rope toy knotted in the middle, faint smell of backyard grass and dish soap. She tiptoed to the couch as if nearing a cradle. "Hi, Super Echo," she whispered. "I brought your lasso." The dog's eyes opened to slits. When the rope touched his paw, a tremor of recognition traveled his body, nostalgia in muscle memory. He tried to lift his head. It rose an inch, then settled. The tail thumped again, 2 beats that cost him precious breath, but one a teary considered this, nodding solemnly the way children do when they pretend their hearts aren't breaking. She kissed Echo's ear, then Mason's cheek, and left a piece of herself in the quiet space between them. Night settled, machines dimmed to soft blue glows. The corridor hush deepened until even shoe squeaks sounded like shouts. Mason lay awake, cataloging each tick from Echo's infusion pump. An hour after midnight, a respiratory therapist pushed the door open to check Mason's oxygen saturation. Echo roused instantly, head lifting, lips parting to reveal exhausted gums. A bark clawed its way out, more cough than threat, but the warning in it froze the therapist mid-step. "It's okay, boy," Mason called, voice low. Echo's gaze flicked to him, then back to the stranger, verifying hierarchy. Only after Mason lifted a palm, signal for all clear, did the dog's head sink again. The therapist exhaled. "Even on his last legs, he's guarding you." Mason watched the rise and fall of Echo's flank. "He always will. My job now is to guard him back." When the hallway quiet reclaimed the room, Mason pressed the remote to raise his bed, ignoring the tug in his healing muscles. He needed to see Echo eye to eye. The dog's gaze met his, amber irises dulled by jaundice, yet steady as dawn through winter branches. "Remember the promise we made the night we left the kennel?" Mason whispered. "You'd work if I believed." "I believed, Echo, and you worked until there was nothing left to give." He swallowed, tears burning like iodine. "So here's the deal. I won't let you go alone. Couch, bed, mountain, grave. Whatever path you choose, I'm walking it too, side by side. Same as always." Echo's ears twitched. He tried to crawl closer. Parts pride and dread, Every protective surge cost Echo heartbeats he couldn't spare. Yet denying him that purpose felt crueler than the illness chewing his liver. He whispered into the hush, "Easy, partner. Let the rest of us keep watch a while." Echo regarded him, eyes apologetic, then laid his head back, keeping one ear lifted. Compromise accepted. Just before dawn, Elena dozed in a recliner, Lila's blanket folded over her lap. Mason watched the city shift from violet to pewter through the window. He thought of all the mornings Echo had waited by the front door, leash in mouth, ready for a run that would start the day in shared breath and pounding paws. He lifted the rope toy from Echo's paws, held it between them like a relic. "Sun'll be up soon," he murmured. "We'll catch it together, you and me. From this couch, if that's what it takes." Echo opened one eye, offered a faint wag, the quiet amen to Mason's vow. Outside, beyond the glass, first light edged the horizon. Inside, two heartbeats searched for rhythm, one faltering, one fighting, tied by a promise that neither illness nor darkness would find them separated. And for that small sliver of morning, vow was enough. The hospital ventilation kicked on with its usual sigh, cool air turning a stale night into something nearly breathable. Mason heard it, the way sailors read waves. Background. Expected. But on this third night of Echo's decline, the shepherd's response was anything but ordinary. Echo's eyes snapped open. His head rose, slow, laborious, nostrils quivering. A low whine escaped, pitched somewhere between warning and plea. Mason, half asleep in the hospital bed, felt the mattress tremble as Echo lurched to unsteady feet. "Easy, boy." He reached for the dog's collar, but Echo was already tracking the unseen, nose lifted toward the ceiling vent above the couch. Elena stirred from the recliner. "What is it?" Echo gave a guttural bark, hoarse, weak, but urgent. He staggered toward the door, collapsed to one knee, forced himself up again. Instinct overruled pain. Mason's heart thudded. Echo barked a second time, two sharp bursts, their established code for immediate danger. Elena hit the call button. "Nurse station, room 417. We need security and maintenance now. Possible chemical alert." Ava Santos arrived first, sidearm holstered, but eyes hard. "Talk to," cut like wire. "Lock down this wing, evacuate non-critical patients, and find whoever accessed the ventilation manifold." Code yellow spilled through the intercom. Nurses ushered sleeping patients into wheelchairs, trailing IV poles. Echo tried to follow every departure, barking raggedly when staff hurried past Mason's room. Each bark cost him. Blood seeped anew from his cracked paw pads. Mason caught his harness. "Stay. Your job's here." Echo stared up, pain clouding amber eyes, then yielded, settling beside Mason's bed, muscles coiled. Elena pressed a mask over Mason's face, and another over Echo's snout, jury-rigged from pediatric tubing. "Fresh oxygen," she whispered, "just until they purge the line." Security replayed CCTV at the nurses' station. 1:38 a.m. A figure in maintenance coveralls entered a restricted duct room, keycard swipe unregistered. A portable cylinder tucked in a rolling mop bucket. The person wore a surgical cap, face turned from the camera. Ava radioed the perimeter. Suspect dressed as night janitor, likely still inside. Units sweep all mechanical rooms. Back in 417, the air meter numbers began to fall. Vent dampers sealed by central control. Echo, mask removed, drew a long breath, then slumped sideways. Elena caught his head before it hit the floor. "Vitals dropping," she whispered. "Pulse thready, respiration shallow." Mason's fist clenched around the bed rail. He sounded the alarm. "Don't you quit on me now, partner." An ICU nurse slid through the door, adrenaline bright in her eyes. "We found trace lines hacked into the 5th floor supply trunk, feeding sevoflurane straight to your room. If Echo hadn't alerted, concentration would have knocked out everyone in minutes." Mason's vision blurred, rage and gratitude warring in his chest. He reached for Echo. The dog's fur felt chilled. A tremor shuddered through the thin body. Elena scanned the monitor clipped to Echo's paw. Oxygen okay, but blood pressure nosediving. She barked orders at the vet tech just arriving. "Bolus fluids, warm blankets, raise hindquarters. He's going into shock." Ava re-entered, breathless. "We've got the perp cornered in the service stairwell. Gas cylinders still attached. Probably planned to slip out after the dose. Echo saved half the ward." She knelt, touching the shepherd's flank. "You stubborn miracle." Echo's ear twitched at her voice. His eyes opened a slit, searching, verifying. "You're safe," Ava assured. "Mission accomplished." Emergency teams flushed the ventilation. "Still watching, huh?" The tail moved half an inch. "You don't have to anymore," Mason murmured, "but I know you will." Elena stood behind him, tears drying on her cheeks. "He's given us another sunrise." She looked toward the window where first light smeared gray across the horizon. "What do we give him?" Mason answered without hesitation. "Every minute we've got left." Security confirmed identity of the infiltrator, a contract HVAC tech with falsified credentials. Links to the De La Cruz cartel. Motive? Finish what antifreeze and bullets had not. Erase the witness. Sow chaos. Buy mercy for a criminal empire. In the official report, credit read, "Alert triggered by canine echo despite terminal illness." But inside room 417, victory felt smaller. Mason could breathe. Elena could hope. Lila would hug her father that afternoon. And Echo, breath shallow, eyes vigilant, rested in the space between machines, still listening to currents only guardians hear. Mason stroked the fur behind the graying ear. "Sleep, partner. I'll keep watch a while." Echo's eyes closed, yet one ear remained lifted, proof that even heroes on borrowed time refuse to clock out until the job is truly done. The tires crunched softly over the gravel as the van turned into the mountain drive. In the back, Echo stirred faintly, his head on Lila's lap, breaths shallow and uneven. Mason reached back from the driver's seat, laying a hand on the dog's ribs. "We're home, buddy," he whispered. Their house stood like a memory, wrapped in pine and snowlight. Elena opened the door before Mason could reach for the keys. Inside, the scent of chamomile and warm wood drifted through a space lovingly prepared. IV supplies in quiet corners. A thick orthopedic bed facing the mountain view. Sunlight pooling in golden hush. Echo was carried in like a knight, not a patient. Lila placed a homemade comic beside his bed. "Super Echo saves the day. He doesn't have laser powers," she explained, "just knowing stuff." In those final weeks, the living room transformed into a sanctuary. Visitors came softly. Some brought bones. Others, only trembling hands to place on Echo's side. Mason kept a cot nearby. often falling asleep to the rhythm of Echo's fragile breath. "He still perks up at footsteps," Mason told Elena, "still trying to do his job." She smiled sadly. "He doesn't know how to be anything else." But slowly, the roles reversed. The protector became the protected. Each morning, Lila delivered a new drawing. Some showed Echo fighting monsters. Others were simple: him curled beside a window, a heart floating from his chest. "That's the dream part," she said. "He's not sad there." One evening, Mason brought out a photo on his shoulder. "And you let him into this family?" Mason shook his head. "He came in on his own and never left." That night, Lila fell asleep beside the dog. Elena dimmed the lights, but not fully. "He never liked full darkness," she whispered. Mason rocked quietly beside him, listening to each breath as though tracking time with his own. Then, just after sunset, they heard it, a scrape, a dragging sound. Echo was standing, not steady, not proud, but moving, toward the old wicker toy basket beneath the bookshelf. With effort, he pulled out 2 collars, his own black canine collar, and a faded brown one, Officer Grant Lou's, his first partner. He limped toward Mason and laid them both at his feet. Mason fell to his knees. Trembling, he picked them up and pressed them to his chest. "Why now?" he choked. Echo looked into his eyes, and in that gaze was everything: patrols, snow, warmth, duty, and the quiet truth: the mission was ending. They lifted him onto the couch, his couch, once forbidden except that one stormy night. He sank into it, body sagging into peace. Facing the window, he exhaled, a deep, complete breath, not in pain, but in permission. Lila laid her drawing, Super Echo flying over the stars, beside his paw. "He finished his story," she said, "and no one gave the command. No one had to." That dawn, the mountains glowed in quiet gold. Inside, the room bathed in morning hush. Echo lay on the couch beneath Elena's quilt. His chest rose and fell, barely. Lila tiptoed in. "Morning, Echo," she whispered. He stirred, lifted his head once, looked at each of them in turn. Elena, the healer; Lila, the heart; Mason, the partner. Their eyes met, no words, no whimper, just the weight of everything shared. Mason knelt. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "So damn good." Echo blinked. His tail gave a faint thump. His chest rose, fell, and did not rise again. Lila kissed his forehead. Elena held his paw. Mason pressed a hand to his heart. Outside, a bird called from the pine. Inside, time stilled. They didn't speak, didn't rush. The goodbye had already happened, in a look, a breath, a moment. Later that morning, Lila hung her drawing above the mantel. Mason placed both collars beneath it. Elena added a brass plate that simply read, "Still watching." The couch stayed untouched for days, but sometimes Mason swore he still heard the soft jingle of Echo's tags. And when the wind passed just right, it sounded dog tags on its handle. The dog lay curled, peaceful. Elena placed the final fold of the blanket over Echo's paws. "He always liked this spot. Even in summer, the ground here stayed cool." Lila, in her oversized coat and rain boots, stepped forward with a fistful of wildflowers. She gently laid them on the box: daisies, bluebells, and a sunflower from the kitchen vase. Then she placed her crayon drawing against the wood. "Super Echo always comes back." "Can he see it from heaven?" she asked. Mason crouched beside her. If there's anything worth seeing up there, he's watching us, and protecting, always. He unfolded an old precinct flag, its blue stripe faded, and planted it at the head of the grave. Beneath it, a plaque read, K9 Echo, loyal beyond life, partner, guardian, family. No one spoke for a long time. Even the birds sounded quieter, as if the world itself paused in reverence. Later that evening, after dinner sat untouched, Mason sat alone on the porch. The wind moved gently through the trees, rustling the flowers laid over Echo's grave. A collar tag left hanging on a branch jingled once and was still again. Inside the house, something had changed. It wasn't just the missing paw steps or the silence before dawn. It was the air itself, the way light lingered longer without a shadow to claim. Elena tried to maintain normalcy. She opened windows, brewed coffee. Lila, in quiet hope, left out dog treats, just in case. Echo forgot where home was. Grief lived in the hollow spaces. Then, weeks later, came Halo. She was young, smaller than Echo, a sable German shepherd with soft eyes and uncertain steps. Rescued from a failed K9 program, deemed too sensitive and too gentle for tactical work. But when she entered the house, she didn't bark or sniff. She walked to the end of the hallway, Echo's old spot, and sat, still, waiting, as if for a command only she could hear. From then on, Mason couldn't ignore it. The instincts, the echoes. Halo positioned herself between Lila and traffic during walks. She nudged Elena's knee when her blood pressure rose. When Mason drifted off on the couch, Halo lay beside him, breathing in time. No one taught her these things. One day, Lila opened a cabinet and found Echo's old towel. "It still smells like him," she said. Halo walked over, sniffed, and placed a paw on it. "She remembers," Lila whispered. Mason touched the towel. Maybe she never forgot. At the training range, Halo performed flawlessly, but it was what she didn't need to be taught that struck me. Presence he knew, without needing to see. At the window, Halo lay under the maple again, as she had every night. But this time, next to her paw was an old collar tag, Echo's spare, the one they thought lost in a thunderstorm years ago. Halo nudged it forward, her eyes calm. "I'm not him," she seemed to say, "but I carry what he left behind." The days passed. The grief softened. The emptiness didn't vanish. It evolved. The house wasn't full again. It was balanced. Halo didn't replace Echo, but she carried his tether, his thread. One evening, Elena watched Halo lying under the tree. "You named her Halo," she said, "but I think she was always that." "She came through a different door," Mason murmured. That night, the wind brushed through the trees like an old friend. Inside, Mason sat in the dark, listening, not just for sound, but for presence. Then came a soft click, wood against paw. Click, click, pause. Halo lifted her head, but didn't bark. She simply watched a space across the room. Mason froze. "I know that sound," he whispered. "I know those steps." Halo walked slowly toward the hallway and sat, alert, watching. Nothing. Or maybe, watching someone. Elena came downstairs, wrapped in the old throw Echo used to drag like a cape. "You heard him too," she said. Not a question. Mason nodded. "I felt him, before I heard him." That night, Mason stepped into the cold. The flag at Echo's grave stood steady in the moonlight. Halo walked beside him without command. At the mound of fresh earth, the laminated drawing Lila had made fluttered slightly. Super Echo, still flying. "She knew you were here tonight," Mason whispered. Halo leaned against his leg. "She's got some of your heart in her," he said. "Or maybe you left pieces for us to find." Above them, the maple swayed gently, a soft pat on the shoulder. Mason woke before dawn to find Halo no longer at the foot of the bed. She sat in the hallway, head bowed, facing the maple. Later, at breakfast, Mason asked quietly, "Do you think it's possible that Echo's still here?" Elena replied, stirring honey into her tea. "Some dogs love so hard, they leave fingerprints in the air. You don't need to see it, you just feel it." "And you feel it?" "Yes." That afternoon, as Lila played with a puzzle and Halo lay beside her, Mason heard the sound again. Click, click, click. This time, only he looked up. "It's okay, boy," he whispered. "We're good now." That evening, Mason stood in the hallway, one hand outside, but Mason felt Echo there like always. This wasn't just testimony. It was legacy. "The call came through as a routine search," Mason said, "but Echo picked up the scent of potassium cyanide before we crossed a wall. He saved my life before I knew it was in danger." The jury leaned in. "He was shot that night, but he dragged me out, laid across me until help came. That was his final mission." When asked if Elias de la Cruz had targeted him personally, Mason replied, "I don't believe it. I know it." He submitted photos, one of chemical vials, the other of Echo beside Lila's crib, taken 3 months before the attempted poisoning. Echo stopped an invisible murder, twice. Then, voice low and steady, Mason said, "I've held brothers dying in my arms, but no one stood between me and death more than that dog." The prosecutor read Alina's letter. "Echo was more than a dog. He was a wall between us and loss. He kept our daughter safe when her father couldn't speak. You never let silence win." 3 hours later, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. De la Cruz stared ahead unmoved, but even he couldn't stop the tremor in his hand when the judge added, "Let the record reflect that this conviction rests in part on a canine named Echo, whose vigilance likely saved many lives. Valor does not require a badge to be recognized." Outside, Mason stepped into the wind. It felt clean, like release. He knelt beside Halo and whispered, he'd have liked this day. Halo pressed into his chest. Later at the precinct's press room, Captain Ortega approached the mic. "We often say our canines are officers, but we don't always treat them like family after. That changes today." He announced the founding of the Echo Initiative, a program to fund medical care and retirement for service dogs. A video played, Echo leaping rubble, guarding Lila's crib, sitting beside Mason. Then one final image, Echo in snow, gazing toward the mountains. Below it, "They gave us everything. We give them peace." Lila had written that line. Applause swelled. Mason stood in the back, silent but full. At the training yard, flags rose slowly. A marble plaque now marked the corner. Canine Officer Echo, loyal beyond life. Mason traced the engraving with his thumb. "He'd have hated the fuss," he said. Ortega nodded. "He earned it." Halo patted over and lay down beside the plaque, still reverent, like she understood. The initiative spread quickly. 10 precincts signed on in weeks. A rehab center broke ground outside Silver Ridge. But for Mason, the real impact came in letters. From officers who'd buried their partners quietly. From widows who kept collars in drawers. From a paramedic who wrote, "We never knew what to do after. Just that we missed them." Each letter felt like a breath Echo left behind. One night, Mason found Lila drawing again. Echo in a cape above a hospital bed, guarding a bandaged dog.
"Who's that?" he asked.
"A future dog. One who gets helped." "You know you started all this," he said. "I know," she whispered. By winter, the initiative had its first pilot, hospice care for terminal canines. The first dog admitted? Rex, once partnered with Grant Lew, Echo's original handler. When Lila visited, Rex lay beside her sketchpad like he'd always belonged there. The world had come full circle. Back home, Mason sat by the window where Echo's bed once lay. Halo slept beside him, her head on his foot. He opened a leather-bound journal and wrote, "It wasn't what he did for me. It was how he did it, without needing to be asked, without needing thanks. Just there." Then he added, "The Echo Initiative isn't a memorial. It's his voice, still speaking." And in the silence, it almost felt like a tale thumped back. The Garden of Watchers opened in spring. A quiet grove of benches, native wildflowers and stone paths. At its center stood the statue, life-sized, veiled beneath canvas. The crowd was modest, no media blitz, just people who had been changed by a dog. Elena sat in the front row, their newborn son Grant bundled in her arms. Lila sat beside her, note card clenched in her hand. Captain Ortega approached the mic. "Some heroes don't wear armor," he said. "They don't need medals or ranks. They just stand between danger and those they love." He nodded, and the veil dropped. There stood Echo, not charging or barking, but sitting, alert, calm, eternal. One paw raised, ears forward, gaze fixed toward something unseen. On the base, Canine Officer Echo. He stood watch when no one else could. Mason approached the podium. "My name is Mason Delacroix," he began. "Most of you knew Echo as a hero, but to me, he was fur on a baby blanket, paws at 6 a.m., a pair of eyes that never asked questions, only stayed." A breeze moved through the garden. He let it speak too. "He saved my life 3 times, once in the field, once in a hospital, and once when I didn't think I was worth saving." He looked to Elena, then to Lila. "We built this garden because silence deserves a place to speak, and because our dogs don't just serve. They stay, they remember, and long after they're gone, they still watch." Then it was Lila's turn. She stepped up, hair tangled, socks mismatched, heart wide open. Her voice didn't shake. "He didn't wear armor, but he saved my dad. He barked at the dark and made the sad less bad. He didn't need medals. He didn't need praise." That followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. That evening, after the crowd had gone, the Delacroix family lingered. Lila tucked a drawing of Super Echo at the statue's base. Elena, holding baby Grant, touched the engraved letters with a fingertip. And Mason stood before Echo one last time, knowing those bronze eyes would never close. Halo walked to his side and sat, facing the same way. Together, they watched the sun fall behind the hills. And in the Garden of Watchers, Echo stood still, forever sentinel, not needing to move. Because his final mission had been fulfilled. He had kept them safe. The sky hadn't chosen a color yet, that hushed blue-gray, the kind only seen before dawn fully breathes, hovered over Silver Ridge. The mountains looked like sleeping giants on the edge of light. Halo sat at the edge of the porch, still but not stiff, the posture of a guardian. Always the same place, always the same time. Mason stepped out barefoot, a steaming mug in hand. The old cedar rocker creaked beneath him, a familiar sound from another life. Halo didn't look up. She didn't need to. The first dog to sit beside him like this had been Echo. Same hour, same silence. Echo used to chuff softly when the first golden thread broke across the hills. Halo did that now too, as if memory passed through blood or spirit. Mason glanced down. Halo's eyes were bright and young, but sometimes, like this morning, she looked ancient. She slept beside the baby's crib. She moved through the house like Echo had, untrained, unasked, simply knowing. Lila came out, hair tangled, oversized shirt brushing her knees. She curled into Mason's lap, eyes on the horizon. "She always beats me out here," Lila whispered. "She's on Echo time," Mason replied. No one said Echo's name out loud anymore, but they all still spoke him, in touches, in silence, in small routines. At 5:49 a.m., the sun sliced the treetops. Halo exhaled. Lila pointed. "The sky looks like it's smiling." In the soft curve of a cloud, Mason saw it too, a shape like a paw print. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Later that week, Mason dreamed vividly. The precinct, fluorescent lights, and Echo beside him, alive and young. They didn't speak. They never had to. At the interrogation room, Echo nudged his hand once, collar lying flat on the rug. It had been hung above his photo for months, unreachable. No wind, no draft. He picked it up gently, brushed his thumb across the nameplate, then placed it on the bookshelf, eye level. Somewhere it could still watch. There were other signs, subtle echoes stitched into the fabric of daily life. The mudroom door creaked open 2 inches, just like Echo used to do when checking the yard. The soft sound of paws crossing the porch at sunrise, toys moving slightly in the night, light flickers, Halo wagging at nothing, pausing in front of the fireplace and leaving space beside her. In a notebook Mason didn't share, he began writing Echo entries. January 6. Hallway light blinked 3 times. Lila said it's Morse code for, "I'm okay." I don't think she even knows Morse code. February 2nd. The smell of cedar. His fur always had that scent. No open windows, just Echo. One morning, Mason sat on the porch beside Halo. Elena came out with Grant in her arms. "Do you think he's still here?" she asked. Mason didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, into the wind. "I don't think he ever left." "He's not trying to stay," Elena whispered. "He just never stopped watching." That morning, Halo lifted her head, ears alert. Not in warning, in recognition, like she, too, had heard it. The dew clung to the grass like memory. The yard was still. Lila walked barefoot, pajama cuffs soaked, a paper envelope of seeds in hand. Forget-me-nots and marigolds. The brave ones, her teacher had said. At the base of the maple, the earth had settled. The plaque read, "Canine Echo, loyal beyond life." Beside it, Lila's drawing, now weather-worn and laminated, showed Echo in a red cape, standing on a hill, tail raised like a flag. But something new was there this morning. A monarch butterfly. It rested on the edge of the plaque, wings open like breath. It didn't startle when she knelt beside it. "Hi, boy," she whispered. "I brought seeds. You'd like them. They're tiny, but brave." She planted them gently, hands carving small lines into the soil. More than flowers, she was planting memory. From the porch, Mason stood with his mug. He didn't call out. He knew this rhythm. These mornings were between her and Echo now. Sometimes she asked him if he still chased squirrels in the clouds. Sometimes she didn't speak at all. Halo sat beside Mason, alert but calm. As the sun rose, golden light swept the tree line. The butterfly lifted, spiraled once around the maple, then vanished into the sky. Lila didn't chase it, just watched it leave. She turned to the statue and passed. She slipped her hand into Mason's. "I think he knew I was there," she said. Mason squeezed gently. He always did. That afternoon, they added one more line beneath the plaque, a small brass engraving, "Still watching." It read, "He guarded more than doors. He guarded hearts." People from the precinct came to see it. Captain Ortega, old canine partners. Some brought their children. Some brought their dogs. Some brought silence. But all of them stood before that maple tree and remembered. Because Echo hadn't just been a hero. He had been a presence, a protector, a listener. And he had stayed until they were safe. As the camera pans out, sweeping across the maple tree, the statue, and the rising sun beyond the hills, Mason's voice returns, not as a whisper, not as a command, just steady, true. He came when we called. He stayed when we cried. He left when we were safe. And he never stopped listening. Halo now lies at the base of the statue, not out of obligation, not out of command, just presence. She lifts her head as the wind moves gently through the trees. The camera holds on the silhouette of Echo's statue, sunlight crowning it in gold, the morning around it still. And for a long, quiet beat, nothing moves, until the breeze stirs again, and somewhere, faint but real, the sound of distant paws echoes through the grass. There's something timeless about the way a dog looks at us, not for who we pretend to be, but for who we truly are. Through joy and sorrow, in moments loud and quiet, their loyalty doesn't waver. Especially with German shepherds, their hearts are built for devotion, for duty, and for love deeper than words. Echo's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come in silence, with a nudge, a paw, or simply staying close. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt something unspoken pass between you, you're not alone. And if you're hoping to strengthen that bond, I came across something that might help. A gentle resource that's more about connection than command. Nothing fancy, just thoughtful ways to understand your dog a little better. No pressure, of course, but if it feels right, give it a look. And maybe share it with someone else who understands what it means to be seen by a four-legged soul. Because sometimes the quietest love is the one that changes everything.